The Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, February 9th, 2015. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Council Members Mike Bonin and Bob Blumenfield, and we are ready to begin. Members, as an initial matter, I'd like to propose items 2, 4, 5, and 2, 4, and 5 as consent candidates. And if there's no objection, those matters will be approved by the committee. Items 1, 3, and 9 also would have been consent candidates, but for cards. So we'll go ahead and take the cards on those matters. Let's call item number 1 first.
Item number 1 is Los Angeles Department of Building and Safety report relative to a refund claim filed by 907 Shenandoah Investment LLC in the amount of $139,275.10.
Thank you. I have one card. Mr. Previn, come on up. And then we're going to go to item number 3 right after you have the only card on that one as well. So go ahead on number 1, please.
Good afternoon, Budget and Finance Committee. And thank you. I will, if you would like, just speak on both items in this one.
Sure.
Exactly. So this here is the Department of Building and Safety report issuing a refund. And this is really just a heads up to take a very close look, because the refund is for approximately $139,000, if I have it correct. But and believe it or not, and I know this is a little embarrassing, somebody thought it was a $17 million deal, but it was a $1.7 million deal. So that needed to be a little correcting there. But when you look at the correcting that was done, you really have to look closely. And by the way, it's an LLC, which again, one of my peeves is I feel we should identify who is in an LLC so we know who we're dealing with. And in this case, I don't know them at all. It's a guy named Human and Mayar Rabbanian. But that's not the point. The point is that it seems to me that the bill that they owed in the end was $40,000. But they paid in 2 installments, one with a check and one with a Visa for $90,000 each. So this just requires very careful scrutiny because it's absolutely confusing, and the backup documentation is questionable. In fact, even in this letter itself, there's a typo in the first page. So someone has to look at these things because we're talking about pushing money out the door back to characters. So we just want to be sure that we're absolutely certain that's appropriate. Item number 3 is a similar deal, although in this case, the mayor agreed to a refund of $60,000. But here we are agreeing to a refund of, again, $139,000, and frankly, the recommendations seem to be for $141,000. So once again, this LLC is tracked to a guy named Mark S-Z-C-Z, E as in Edward, P-A-N-I-A-K. I don't know the chap at all, but we need to understand that these refunds, which is a lot of money going out, are accurate. And I mean, it's just worrisome that there should be such errors in that space. So thank you.
All right. Thank you. So members, we can take item number 1 first if there's no objection to approving the recommendation. And Mr. Kretz is with us. Item number 1 will be deemed approved. Item number 3, any objection to approving the recommendations on item number 3? Seeing none, item 3 is approved. And that brings us then to item number 9. And on item number 9, I have a card from Mr. Mcquiston. Come on up, Mr. Mcquiston. Let's go ahead and introduce item number 9.
Item number 9 is the motion LeBron Farrow relative to transferring funds for the purpose of trimming approximately 80 trees in Council District 4. Public Works Gang and Reduction Committee waived consideration of the above item.
Good afternoon.
Jim Mcquiston. Now, if this is for actually city-owned property, there's no problem at all. If it's not city-owned, like if it's in an easement or something like that, there is a constitutional problem. And the only thing that I wanted to bring up was the fact that we do have to be careful about pruning somebody else's property and giving them a free ride. The state law says that they have to be billed, and if it isn't city-owned property, if it's only an easement, then the state law says that they got to be billed. That's no problem. But the problem is that we're not giving them notice, because normally the state law says you have to give them notice and give them an opportunity to do it themselves before the city comes in and puts on the 40% extra charge and so forth.
All right, thank you. For the record, Mr. Bonin had to step out to go to another committee. We expect that he'll be coming back shortly. But members, is there any objection to, yeah,
Question
Mr.
about
Blumenfield?
this item.
Yes.
Not an objection, just a question. I don't know if the appropriate staff person to answer, just about this, whether this is District 4 money specifically and what it comes from and how much money is in the account that exists. So could we have the appropriate...
Do we have Public Works staff here who can explain the source of these developer fees and how they're related to the geography?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. My name is Ching Lagan from the Office of Accounting, Public Works. I understand your question is the balance and the account where the money is coming from.
Well, it's twofold. One is the money coming from an account that is specifically for District 4, or is it a general city account? Where is the money coming from?
Actually, the money is coming from the Public Works Trust Fund.
But if you can speak to the nexus issues as to how that money was derived from particular developers for use in particular areas, I think that's what Mr. Blumenfield is.
Is it money that could have been spent anywhere in the city, or does it have to be spent in this area?
Actually, deposits in the Public Works Trust Fund are for specific Public Works related projects. Regarding the use of the funds, it's actually it has to be recommended by the Public Works Bureau of Engineering. The Office of Accounting is responsible for the accounting of the funds in the Public Works Trust Fund, but as far as recommendation of the use of the funds, it has to come from the Bureau of Engineering. And regarding your question regarding the nexus, I would assume that they have to seek also the advice of the State Attorney's Office.
So this money could have been spent anywhere in the city?
As long as there's a nexus between the deposit and the project for which the amount is to be used. Again, the determination has to come from the Bureau of Engineering. Unfortunately, I cannot, answer how they made that determination.
From a particular, it's project fee that was generated by a project that is in a particular area that needs to have a nexus to that area?
Exactly.
Or is it money that would have been deposited in a general city fund? That's what I'm trying to get at.
Okay, the funds are in the Public Works Trust Fund.
I understand that.
Right. So this particular account in the Public Works Trust Fund are cash deposits that were received by the Bureau of Engineering that also include cash payments for defaulted surety bonds on abandoned development projects, and they can also include cash payments for work that has to be done by the Bureau of Engineering.
So if there were a project in my district, it could have gone to this fund that is being used in this spot? Is that possible?
I'm sorry,
Is engineering staff here?
No, actually, I invited them over to come to this meeting so they can address whatever questions you have. Because, like I said, the Office of Accounting, we only account for the accounting of the funds in the Public Works Trust Fund. Unfortunately, no one is available to come.
So I'd love to have some of these answers. Prior to voting on this.
Sure. I can't give you the answer as precisely as the engineers at the Bureau of Engineering could give, and maybe they're on their way. But essentially, these are project funds derived by particular developers of particular projects. When there's surplus because of savings, because a project wasn't completed, whatever, that money is deposited into the trust fund. Mm-hmm. And this is so the request that's before us is an appropriation of funds from that trust fund to areas that would be related to the projects that generated the funds. But
I'm okay with it.
But we can advance it and then make sure that engineering staff is prepared to provide those answers prior to council so that they can answer more eloquently than I, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Mr. Kretz?
Yeah, I have the same questions. I think we need to have that clarified, whether we can randomly make a request from this fund or whether it's specific to Council District 4.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there probably are similar situations, and we'll want to have that report from engineering as well, because it could potentially affect other districts as well. But as to this issue, that's where they were derived is from.
Yeah, my understanding is it appears that Bureau of Engineering made some research as to the availability of these funds to be used in this particular purpose. But
All right.
again,
It's the question whether it's just available for this purpose or whether it's limited for this purpose. You know, but that's the question we can.
right, yeah, for the Bureau of Engineering to, to address.
So it's unfortunate that they're not here. Let's go ahead and advance it forward, if that's okay with you members, and then we'll make sure that engineering staff is present in council when we present this for vote so that they can explain that more precisely.
And maybe they can meet with us individually prior to the council as well, or I would certainly welcome a visit from them on this topic.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That'll be the action of the committee. That brings us then to, for the members of the public who were here on item number 8, there's a number of cards. I want to hear all of you. But I do want to just give you the heads up that we're still waiting on a report from the city attorney's office on this matter. So we're not going to take action on that matter today. We're going to continue it in committee. But I do, because you took the time to come down, I definitely want to hear from everybody if you'd like to still offer public comment. So why don't we go ahead and go to that now then. So we'll take the public comment on item number 8. And this won't be your only opportunity, because when it comes back again with the report, I'm not going to foreclose public comment at that time either. So the first card is from Matthew Dunn, followed by Jay Handel.
And item number 8 is the motion Martinez-Weezer-Krikorian relative to instructing the Office of Finance to cease issuance of new business tax registration certificates to any medical marijuana dispensary not complying with Proposition D, and revise the language or appearance of the BTRC in order to prevent the perception and misrepresentation of the certificate's intent, and that it is not a license to operate.
Mr. Dunn, good afternoon.
Hi. Thank you, Council Chair and honored council members. Committee, it's an honor to be here. I'm a member of GLOCA, the Greater Los Angeles Area Collectives Association, and I'm also affiliated with the UFCW 770 Union of Retail Workers. I'm a father of 3, a homeowner, and a proud native of the city of Los Angeles. Regarding item number 8, these BTRCs are being used to dupe landlords and other vendors to open illegal pot shops. The consequence of that is that, criminals are operating in our city, and they're undercutting the legal businesses which are paying their taxes, their Measure M taxes, to the Office of Finance. Just to give you some rough numbers, I think last year the Office of Finance reported collecting $8 million from Measure M legal operating Prop D collectives. The City of LA has a population of about, I think it's 10 million. The state of Colorado only has 5 million. They collected $100 million in their first year. So it's easy math to see that millions and millions of dollars are slipping through the city's fingers out of the much-needed city budget into these criminal operators. In this district right here, within 15 square blocks of City Hall, there's 90 illegal pot shops. On Los Angeles Street, there's 4 in a row next door to each other. So we know they use these BTRCs to dupe landlords into thinking they're permits and licenses. We know that they're not paying taxes on them. They're not paying sales tax or Measure M taxes. And we're basically we're giving criminal operation the ability, enabling them to operate criminally. So I ask you, please vote yes on item 8 when you get the chance.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Handel, followed by Sarah Armstrong.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Jay Handel. I'm speaking today both as the chair of the West LA Sawtell Neighborhood Council as well as the Budget Advocates. Over the last year and a half, we've made recommendations to our council member, Mr. Bonin, and to the city that the BTRCs are actually fooling people, and that what should be happening, we truly believe that no matter what you do, whether you say you're going to stop them from having it or not, anyone will go in under a retail permit and ask to get a retail permit, and they're going to sell their cannabis. So what we've asked, because what we know is how hard it is to close down the illegal shops, is that you change the code and you put this under the police permitting system. So anybody who is compliant to the prop, I won't say legally operating, but compliant to the prop should have to go through the police permitting system and then post that in their window so that any peace officer can walk by that window and see that it's either a legally, quote, legally operating shop or not. The city attorney has told me in the past that it's really difficult to do that because we're really allowing a federal crime to continue in our city, so they're not actually legally operating. So they wouldn't suggest doing that type of permit. CID can look at that very easily and call them in for a hearing, as opposed to narcotics, it has to go through hoops and whistles and end up blowing their cover and move to another division after they go into some of these shops, get caught on film, it goes viral, and all the bad guys know, who's coming in to bust them. So I would encourage this group to not only stop issuing BTRCs, but to put in a mechanism, whether it's a sticker in the window that has the prop letter in it, or go to the commission and have the police commission enforce it through CID. You'd save a lot of resources in narcotics, and you'd make it easier for everybody to see it. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Handel. Our next speaker is Sarah Armstrong, followed by Jim Mcquiston. Good afternoon.
Thank you for hearing my concerns. I'm Sarah Armstrong, the Director of Industry Affairs for Americans for Safe Access, which is a national organization that represents medical marijuana patients and others who seek to use medical marijuana for therapeutic and research purposes. We have found that patients are generally very law-abiding people. They like to acquire their medicine in a clean, safe, and legal environment. The confusion with the BTRCs has grown so widespread and so confusing that patients can't really be sure that they're walking into the place that they think they are, namely one that is sanctioned by the city under the Prop D limited immunity. I urge you in the strongest possible terms to limit LO50 Measure M tax designations only to those who meet the criteria which would make them eligible for Prop D limited immunity. In this resolution, there is a section which asks the city to come up with criteria so that we all may know who is operating in an open, legal, and transparent manner. This is very important because the state of California is moving very aggressively to put forward legislation, and in every one of those bills, they are asking the City of Los Angeles to identify who among their medical marijuana facilities is a legal facility or at least eligible for Prop D. It's a real problem. Last year we opted out and simply asked the legislation to give us a free ride, but it doesn't appear that the legislature is very interested in that. So having a criteria that we could all understand and adhere to and a clear vision of who is operating legally would be a godsend to the patients in this city, and there are many of them, and they wish to support the city in a legal and correct manner. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker on this matter is Jim Mcquiston. Mr. Mcquiston.
Jim Mcquiston, I support the motion. When you go in for a sales tax permit, they ask you all sorts of questions. They don't just give you a sales tax permit, just bang like that. And the same thing ought to happen in the city. The problem is that the city is so interested in just collecting money that they forget to ask questions. And with a small staff, it's pretty hard to start asking questions like you do in the sales tax division. But we do have to do that. Otherwise, there is some confusion. I like the idea of putting this on the permit itself, that it doesn't allow you to do any particular sale if in fact, this is the way the city is going to operate.
All right, thank you. So, members, we're still awaiting information from the city attorney on this, so without objection, we're going to hold this in committee, continue it until such time as we have that report back, and we'll re-agendize it at that time. So that brings us to item number 7.
Item number 7 is the City Administrative Officer report relative to authorization for the Director of Finance to execute a contract with Muni Services LLC for utility users tax discovery, audit, and tax compliance review services.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Jennifer Lopez with the Office of the CAO. The item before you is a request from the Office of Finance to execute a 3-year contract with 2 one-year extension options with Muni Services LLC. That's for utility users tax discovery services, audit, and tax compliance review. This service was previously provided by Muni Services under a previous contract that expired in January of 2011. Finance released an RFP to select a new vendor with only one response, and that came from Muni Services as well. So upon review by Finance, they determined that Muni Services had the appropriate skill level and met all the requirements of the RFP. The contract itself supports the utility... I'm sorry?
There was only one respondent to the RFP?
Yes.
Is there anybody in the industry other than Muni Services who does this kind of work?
I'm not quite sure. I could check with Ed Cabrera from
Because
Office
it
of Finance.
seems like they're the only contractor that we ever have to do these things. And I know it's extremely specialized, and this is a narrow niche of that I haven't seen anybody else. I don't know if we ever even get any other respondents to the RFP.
We do get a handful of respondents. Unfortunately, we don't get quite a lot. I would say on average we may get 4 to 5, but again, once we go through the analysis and the process, we are looking for the most experience and at the best cost.
That's better than I expected, so okay. Sorry, didn't mean to. Go ahead.
As I was saying, that it supports the utility users tax or the UUT enhancement program to ensure that the city receives its fair share of the UUT revenues that it's entitled to. Muni Services will continue to identify telecommunications providers that are doing business in California as part of their discovery efforts that are subject to paying the UUT, as well as doing audits of payments that are made to the city on UUT, just making sure that they're paying the right amount to the city. They also under this contract, will be receiving compensation on a contingency basis, which means that any revenues that are received, they get a percentage cut. If they don't do any collections at all, they get nothing. Right now, the percentage is 22.5% of the revenues collected between 0 to 700,000 is and 25%. Or I'm sorry. Collections above 700,000 will be compensated at 9% of the collected amount. This is actually a reduction to the prior contract that we had with Muni Services. They did experience delays in executing the contract due to delays, legal issues with the language in the contract, so that's why we're here today. But we do recommend that we execute a contract to continue our utility user service tax revenues collection.
Questions?
Yes,
Mr. Blumenfield.
If we didn't have a service like this, what percent would go uncollected, you think?
Forgive me, let me introduce myself. Ed Cabrera, Assistant General Manager, Office of Finance. It's difficult to say how much would escape. One of the primary reasons that we're looking at Muni Services is more so for their expertise in terms of identifying additional services that are covered under the Communications Users Tax Ordinance that are subject to the taxation. We also believe that it's prudent to come back out with the contract with Muni Services, given the fact that beginning in January of 2016, AB 1717, which is state legislation that allows the State Board of Equalization to start collecting on a statewide basis on local UUTs that would be specifically applicable to prepaid communication charges. Muni Services will assist the Office of Finance in that collection. But I would have to say that the contract with Muni Services is a belts and suspenders approach. Office of Finance does have audit staff that do conduct CUT audits, so we are also identifying that through the audit process as well as discovering businesses, but having Muni Services adds to that punch, and given the fact that it's completely on a contingency fee basis, unless the city actually identifies and collects through Muni Services efforts, Muni Services would not realize that contingency fee.
Right. Although, there's some financial number about what percentage would make it profitable, and I assume we're above that in terms of if we went left uncollected versus the 22%. So that's one thing, and I get that. The other, do we do this for other things, like have Muni Services for compliance with other taxes, like transfer tax or other?
Yes, well, not only Muni Services, but for example, we do have a different vendor that provides audit and discovery services for parking occupancy tax. That's the Parking Network. Muni Services does have a contract with the Office of Finance for sales and use tax, discovery and misallocation services. So there are other taxes, including transient occupancy tax, that we do have separate contracts on. Again, all on a contingency fee basis and all to support and supplement what our audit staff does.
They're all similarly structured with a 22%, or is it all over the map depending on what the...
There are different rates depending on what was submitted during the RFP process. And of course, we do attempt to negotiate, and often, again, depending on the city's financial circumstances, if there is a need to go back to the vendor and ask for some type of relief on negotiated compensation, we have had that ability to do that in the past.
Thank you.
I didn't expect you to know this offhand, but to follow up on Mr. Blumenfield's question, would be interesting to know whether the scope of the Muni Services contract on TOT encompasses short-term non-hotel rentals, like Airbnb.
Sure. In theory, it would. Generally, what Muni Services works on the transient occupancy tax contract would be the smaller types of hotels and motels. So in theory, if there is information that does come across to them within the short-term rental industry, so to speak, that conceivably could be covered. But generally, their focus is going to be on the smaller hotels and motels. Our Office of Finance staff works on the larger entities, primarily because it's not, those larger entities are not limited to TOT, but they also have business tax, POT, and other types of obligations that Office of Finance auditors examine as well.
Anything else, members, on this? All right, any other questions, Mr. Bloomfield? All right, if there's no objection, it'll be the action of the committee to approve the recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that brings us to item number 10.
Item number 10 is the motion of LaBonge Wesson relative to requesting the City Administrative Officer to identify funds to assist in the financing of the Special Olympics World Games to be held in Los Angeles in the summer of 2015.
You know what? I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, okay. Never mind. Scratch that. I was getting got my cards mixed up, sorry. All right, item number 10. And is that Mr. Carr I see back there? Would you like to join us?
Good afternoon to the committee, and I think Mr. Carr is the COO of the Special Olympics. I'd like him to start off to give a broad overview of the operation this summer.
Sure. Well, thank you all for letting me be here. Just a brief reminder, I think you all have heard this probably 3 or 4 times, either when I've met with you individually or through council reports, but the largest sporting event in the world is going to be here in Los Angeles this summer, actually in just a little over 5 months. Opening ceremony will be on July 25th at the LA Memorial Coliseum, live on ESPN around the world. We'll be welcoming between 7,000 athletes and 3,000 coaches from around the world, 170 countries around the world, and it'll be the largest event in the city since the 1984 Olympics. And Councilman LaBonge, his motion was to ask for support from the City of Los Angeles for financial support. I would mention that you've already provided some support via the Los Angeles Police Department and the Fire Department, we actually have some loaned employees, of which two of the finest are sitting next to me, who are helping us primarily on security planning to ensure that we prepare for the security needs. We expect the president to potentially be here and lots of foreign dignitaries from around the world, as well as for our emergency planning. Just to give you a perspective as you consider this in terms of what other entities, government entities are doing, the state committed $5 million cash in this last budget, have added an additional $800,000 to essentially pay for 300 National Guardsmen. They're going to be activating the National Guard, who will be helping us with logistics and operations this summer. The federal government has committed $2.6 million from the Department of Defense for various logistics and operations support, and I was just in Washington last week, they're considering another $3.3 million in requests for operations that would be supported. The County of Los Angeles end of September committed $1.5 million in cash. Their employees are launching the 100,000 employees, the various departments are launching a fundraising campaign around Support an Athlete campaign, and they're looking at, we have about 117 short-term positions for our lead up to the games. Within 30 to 90 days of the games, we hire about 117 people. So the county is helping us look at how they might help us fill some of those positions by loaning us county employees who might have skills for, say, in technology to be desktop support folks for a short period of time during the games. So I think the request would be to consider a cash contribution as other government entities would do in this next year's budget cycle, as well as consider support of potential loaned employees from various cities departments to help us with some of those short-term supports. And with that, we have the good Councilman LaBonge here who might want to say something for himself, I'm sure.
I just wanted to say thank you.
Mr. LaBonge, and I'm happy to turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say this is a one-time opportunity we have again to open our hands and reach high.
Reach up.
And reach up and celebrate this. And I would like to fully ask the City Administrative Office to see if there's any funding source that could go, because cash does need to help in this area here, but also work out, as we did during the 84 games, opportunities for employee or groups of employees to help in very many special ways. Of the events, and I'm sorry I was running from the other committee, how many are in Los Angeles City?
We have 27 different venues, 25 sports, and all but 5 of those are actually in the city of Los Angeles.
Right.
5 are actually in Long Beach.
Right.
Sports.
So it's very much part of our city. So and I know you scramble all the time and crunch the numbers in this, so I think it would be very worthy, and I don't know if there's any money in the TOT, but I'm looking for the CAO's representative and say this is an actual, there's going to be revenue coming in for the number of hotel rooms used. It's an opportunity to give forward and get back. And
I might add just on that, I think we've tied up 33,000 hotel room nights in the city of Los Angeles. There's an economic impact report that was done through the LA Tourism Board and Micronomics that estimates it'll generate about $415 million of economic activity in the region. And we actually we expect about 500,000 spectators. About half of those will come from outside LA County, so it should generate a significant amount of tourism, and folks will be coming from outside the area to hopefully drop money. We also have committed so far about just under $52 million in terms of the overall budget, which is about $70 million. So we're substantial away down the road, but we still have a ways to go in the next 5.5 months. So, and the vast majority, one last thing I would say, the last 3 World Games have been outside the United States. About 80 to 85% of the budget has been covered by government. We're going to flip that. About 80 to 85% of the cost of these games will be borne by philanthropic and corporate private. We have lots of corporate sponsors like Coca-Cola, Toyota, Mattel, Deloitte, Bank of America that have contributed anywhere from $3 to $5 million in many cases. So we are hoping to have about 15 to 20% of these games covered by local, state, and federal government.
Mr. LaBonge?
Yeah, I just going to ask the CAO, with that good information, that you could crunch the numbers and maybe come back to this committee. I mean, I'd love you to say yes today, but study it, because this is an opportunity that is being created that would balance out in the end. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. LaBonge. Thanks for the motion. And further to that, and Director Mr. Englander, welcome. In the last budget discussion, we had we approved 4 or 5 resolution authorities, I think, in the fire department and the police department at a first year, partial fiscal year cost of around $110,000 and a full year cost of around $660,000, something like that.
That's correct.
But I actually don't remember as I sit here how that applies to this. Whether that was absorbed by the departments, whether we in fact budgeted the full amount for the full year. What was the status of those positions?
The positions were allocated to the departments. There's, I believe, 3 positions from the LAPD, and they could correct me if I'm mistaken. There's 2 positions in the fire department for a direct salary cost of about $632,000. If you add the related costs associated with those positions, it brings up the total to about $970,000 on an annual basis. Now, those positions were provided to the departments, and I believe they were provided without additional funding. So it is something where the departments have to cover those positions with their current salary dollars.
So whether those costs were absorbed by the departments or whether there was an appropriation to the departments to make up for it, it's
a general fund. Yeah, whether the departments are provided direct funding for them or not, it's in essence being paid from the general fund. To the point Councilmember LaBonge is making, and I don't know about the timing of when the funds, any additional funds would be required. The budget planning for next fiscal year is already going on. Since the budget isn't in effect until July 1st, I don't know if that is, soon enough for any dollars that would be needed, if so directed, which leaves it this fiscal year the proper avenues for possibly reviewing something like that would be the financial status reports, identifying any funds that would come from any surpluses in various accounts and or the reserve fund as an option.
And then in addition to any potential cash, I'm assuming that there are departments in the city other than fire and police that are going to incur substantial costs with this event, which might or might not be reimbursable.
That's correct.
Is that true?
That's correct. As with any other activities, typically there are additional services outside of the police and fire departments, like street services, public works departments that would incur some costs associated with the event that may or may not be covered through some MOU with the event organizers.
Okay. Members, questions, comments on this? Mr. Fritz?
Yeah, obviously this is a very important event, and we're happy to host it. I just wonder how much of this cost has been planned for and discussed leading up to this point in what is a relatively broke city where we are down about 7,000 employees from where we were a few years ago, and we'll start this next budget year $165 million short. As important as this is, I think we need to plan it in context so we're not digging ourselves a bigger hole. How did we get to this point and find this ask just coming to us now, or has the CAO and the mayor been in conversations about this leading up to this point?
Well, I'll have the CAO speak for the CAO, and I don't know if the mayor's office representative, but you have an ad hoc committee that the president of the city council appointed, and we reached out to see what we could do to help in this event as it has now become the new year and the focus. So if this was approved, and let's say this contribution by the city of Los Angeles was in fiscal year 15-16, that'd be okay. It doesn't have to be today, Paul, but it could be in next year's budget if we make a commitment to do that. Either way, we get them today or tomorrow, but we should participate in this.
But this wasn't discussed when the event was first planned.
Well, I think always, I want to say this, always what the city has done since the 84 games is try to collaborate, get as much partnership with the privates, but also have the city be a stakeholder in it, because that helps when they say the city's involved too.
And the authorizations, the positions, the last budget cycle was the extent of our involvement up to that, with regard to identifying resources up to this point.
Were we expecting to be asked to do this additional funding?
Not until the motion was presented, have we been, in essence, asked to identify additional sources of funds.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Englander?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I want to thank Councilman LaBonge for putting such a big, hanging the Olympic torch on this, if you will. You have really run with this from day one, and Reverend Carr, it's great to see you. I know you came in to meet with a lot of us individually when you took on this phenomenal project. This is so exciting, and near and dear to my heart as well, as I've had the opportunity with the Sunshine Kids that come in with LAPD each and every year, where we go escort them to Raleigh Studios and various places throughout the city, and it's incredibly rewarding and spectacular that we're having the games here. Some of the dollar figures you talked about as well, and I think we really need to step up, and I think there's a lot of economic benefit, and since this is the Budget and Finance Committee, to focus that on the financial aspects of this and of the games here. Because there's a lot of other benefit to LA doing this as well, but particularly on the budget side, I would think there's an upside. Do we have, and I don't know, maybe it's really a question for the CAO to come back and look at some of the economic analysis and what came back after the Olympic Games here last time, and figure out what was that financial benefit. Yeah. There were a lot of stories.
LA 84 Foundation.
That's right. Yeah, and so maybe looking at, we know that this is going to be big. We know there are 7,000, participants coming in. We know, and as you mentioned earlier, some of the other folks have ponied up financially. The state, $5 million, I believe you shared. Where are those funds going to help offset the cost of putting it on, or because I would assume LA as a city, we're taking on the burden in terms of workload and employees with police, fire, transportation, engineering, a lot of the folks in logistics who are going to be out there in full force. The city family that's, even you think about, it's changing street sweeping to make sure that where they're going and they're running and the torch is going down those paths, to bringing in K-Rail. all the things that are involved logistically, and you've done a great job in hammering out some of those details. Those offsets that the state of California and others are helping out, where does that go? I know it goes to the Olympic Committee, to the World Games, but is that to pay for some of those costs, or are they for other costs?
Well, so for the state, theirs is a straight $5 million cash, so that came directly to the organizing committee and helps us offset our costs in about 5 categories: personnel, operations, transportation, and I think there's 2 others. Then this year's budget, so that was in the 2014-15 budget, the legislature appropriated that money. We've already received that cash. In the next budget cycle, the governor's already committed to allocating $800,000 to the National Guard to supplement their budget that comes from the federal government and the Department of Defense to pay the stipends, in essence, for the National Guardsmen who get activated.
Got it.
For a 2-week period, it'll pay for their stipends because their federal money was cut. So in that case, some of it's direct and some of it's essentially VIK to us, although it's paid through the National Guard. The county's going to be the same way. They've already given us $1.5 million in cash. We received the check last month, and then we're in conversation with them right now about actually loaned employees that would be on top of that, as well as their employees are doing a fundraising campaign. And then the federal government will be $2.4 million or $2.6 million that's already committed specifically for logistic items. So that's things like transportation, porta potties and generators and things that are very specific that they can fund out of this department. There'll be no employees for them. So I think each level of government, it's a mix of both cash and it's been a combination of then either loaned employees or specific money that's covering a specific expense where they're procuring that on our behalf.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Blumenfield? So, yeah, Mr. Bond.
I had a question about the loaned employees. I'm thrilled Special Olympics is coming to LA, but I share some of Mr. Koretz's concerns. If I had $1.5 million to spend, there's affordable housing, there's a backlog of sidewalk repair, there's so many different things in the city of LA to do. I'm generally okay with the in-kind services. I have a hard time figuring out how we can justify a cash allotment. But I'm curious about the loaned employees that you're talking about. What are we talking about? And here's the prism through which I'm asking it. If we agree to the loaned employees, am I going to have a harder time getting a street crew to do something in my district because they're otherwise deployed, or a harder time getting a stop sign installed because DOT is otherwise occupied, or am I going to have a hard time getting the extra cops I've been begging Chief Beck for Venice Beach because they're otherwise assigned? That's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't speak obviously for the general managers. I think it would depend on the department and depend on, the kind of employee that was probably loaned. But I mean, certainly there would be some impact, I would imagine. Having worked in the city, I would imagine there would be some impact to their departments. But I think that would be something you'd have to ask every general manager that was either willing or able to loan. What the county's doing, they're essentially assigning, they're going to be telling employees, they'll determine which employees in what positions that match our hiring plan, and then they'll say, from this day forward, for this 30-day period, you're going to report to work at this location as opposed to the current location that they're reporting to.
The county didn't drop thousands of employees like we did over the past few years.
Right.
I have very few instances where I call a general manager and they're generally helpful, but they're pushing back because they're short-staffed as it is in most of the cases.
I don't have the information yet, but I'm going to guess that if we added up the departments that are impacted by this, the costs that will be incurred related to this very significant event are going to be significant. In some kinds of events, we would ask that those be reimbursed to the city. In others, we may choose not to, and that's the sort of in-kind, I think, thing that would be helpful to Special Olympics and to other organizations where we do that sort of thing. But as I sit here, I don't have even a sense of what the magnitude of that would be. So I think one of the things Mr. LaBonge asks for in his motion is to ask that all affected city departments be instructed to provide the CAO with cost estimates of the city services. I think kind of the first step for this committee should be to do that and to identify what are the expenses that each of the departments are going to incur, what budgetary needs do they have in order to meet this increased workload that they're going to have, and then if that's reported back to this committee, we can then make some assessments of how best to address those additional costs, whether to waive some reimbursement or not, whether departments can absorb those expenses or not, whether we need to supplement their budgets as we, may if we go into the following fiscal year with the police and fire employees. I think we have to have that in front of us before we can really make an assessment of what we're able to do. Does that make sense? So, which is one of the points that the motion calls for. I would just suggest that we do it in that order. We get that information back before us first, and then we can make a more informed decision about how best to meet those needs and meet the needs of the Special Olympics as well. Does that make sense?
Hear back from those departments.
Yeah, well, and maybe have the CAO be the point person on that in receiving that information back from the departments, then reporting back to us so that we don't have to have 15 people in here reporting. Yes, Mr.
That's a great idea. I just asked the CAO additionally look at, when they do these estimates, whether it's the Super Bowl, the Olympic Games, now here the Special Olympics, and NCAA tournaments, how much the economic impact it has. They look at that, and maybe we could find that in the TOT, in 15-16, that there could be a cash allotment for that. And the lone employees are those, I'm just thinking in recreation and parks. If they say, okay, let's see, because they get that experience of working with these athletes doing something, it only enhance that, whatever it may be, but that's still to be determined. I don't think that's the main point, but I think it would be great if we could contribute 1.5 million, 1.5 million to the cash contribution to this, and then also whatever our costs are, how they could be absorbed.
So I don't know that the CAO would be able on its own to assess the entire economic impact, because there's many intangibles and indirect benefits as you described, but at least in terms of revenue impact, would it be feasible to be able to report back to us, assuming X number of participants and Y number of hotel stays, to have some ballpark estimate of the revenue benefits?
We could definitely take a look at the TOT component of this, the revenue that would be generated from the hotel stays.
Potential sales tax generation. And
yeah, so, and it'd be possible to look over what Mr. Carr indicated had been already provided.
Yeah, we can certainly give you a copy of that report that was done by the Tourism Board about a year and a half ago.
Thank you, Ben.
Great. Does that make sense, members? Does that make sense?
And do you think we could do it within 30 days or less?
We will issue a memo to general managers as soon as feasibly possible, and request their report back within a 2-week period.
Oh, great.
Wow. You don't get what you don't ask for, Mr. Labange.
Reach up, L.A.
The CAO is reaching up.
That's right.
Well done, Mr. Seha. Okay, without any other objection or questions, thank you, Mr. Labange. That'll be the action of the committee. All right.
Excuse me, for clarification, we'll hold it in committee until the report back? Thank you.
Yes. Okay, so our final matter is our closed session matter, and we have one card, that's Mr. Previn, and he's also going to speak for general public comment, so come on up, Mr. Previn, and speak to both of those items, and then we'll retire to closed session.
Thank you, sir. Is there no report? Other than what's written, there's no oral report on the litigations? The liability?
It's closed session. It's a closed session item.
Oh, so they're reporting to you in closed session?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, it is Eric Previn, a city resident from Studio City and also a candidate in this CD2 council district race. This is a look at our general fund liability accounts. And I have to say I'm pleased at the timely reporting, because this is at the end of 2014. It's current up through that period, the total paid, which is really quite impressive as we're in January. So kudos on the quick reporting. I think what this shows is that available is, we have spent 33 out of the $53 million in these funds, with a remaining balance of 20 million. And that is interesting. I looked at the kinds of cases that we are exposed to, obviously, in city government, which is slightly different than county government, but not that different. Of course, you have the sheriff's department in the county. You have the LAPD here, which would be the kinds of law enforcement cases. There are also some ones that have to do with the kind of unfriendly conduct regarding sidewalk ordinances about where people can be. That cost us $725,000 in Jones, that case, which has been a long-standing issue. I think that the way we fight legal battles is really important here at the City of Los Angeles. And I think especially with regard to Willis, that came up, as you know, in our last meeting about sidewalk repair. And that was the real issue that I was trying to shine some light on. I don't see that one listed here. This is a case that I know you're working on settling in its final phases, but this is a case that has, I think, resulted in city attorney advice to not deal with the repairs. Last week it was turned into a glorious moment in which some of this group were releasing $27 million finally, but as we know, it was released a long time ago, and in fact the $7 million wasn't pushed out the door. That kind of strategy, I think, is what we need to take a good long look at Okay,
wanna
so you want me to
go right
roll into
general
public comment and finish up? Sure. So it is Eric Previn in the public comment, and I am a city resident from District 2 and also a candidate. Rolling right into my concern, which I raised here in this office for the first time about hiring a panel of attorneys who we've earmarked 5 groups, 5 law firms, to facilitate litigations against the city and to have those litigations paid for by developers. I raised the Brown Act violation because it wasn't agendized properly in this session, and I know that the city attorney is tracking it closely and going to respond soon. And city attorneys give opinions, but it is in fact this body who has the determination in the end as to whether or not they feel it was appropriately agendized. And I think local publications have written about this. There's a real concern about this issue, and I think that the only way forward for this committee, is to put it back on the agenda here so that, in fact, the many interested parties have a chance to come and express why there are concerns about that structure. It is a conflict of interest in simple terms. It's complicated, but lawyers know what we're talking about, and I think we are passing through the phase where nobody understands anything, and thus we just put it out there and push it along. I think we're facing a time in city government where it is time, in fact, to ask serious questions like, is this in the interests of our constituents and of the community groups who may bring suit against the city, not because they're pests and uncooperative, but because, in fact, they have vested interests in their communities and in the way things are being conducted by developers. And I'm not anti-development. I want that to be absolutely clear. It's just that there are good and bad, and this requires really careful consideration. So I hope that this group will make that recommendation to their city attorney to put it on the agenda properly with plenty of notice, and then let the city council hear it too. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And with that, we are in closed session. We're back in open session. There being no other action before the committee.
For this item, would you like to note and file the city attorney's report? For item number 6?
It'll be the action committee to note and file the city attorney's report. Item number 6. There being no other work before us, we are adjourned.